Here we go for another video on Africa. In our last video, we focused on the big empires in West Africa, starting with Ghana, then Mali, and Songhai. Now we're going to focus on the Gulf of Guinea and the forest region and some of the smaller empires, smaller kingdoms, but it's going to be a whole lot of these smaller kingdoms in a very concentrated area. So let's take a look at the forest region. This stretches 2,000 miles from the Atlantic coast, up here, all the way through the Gulf of Guinea, all the way down here to the former kingdom of Benin and Cameroon. So it's 2,000 miles, a massive amount. That's the distance from LA to Chicago, Route 66. First settled by the Nok people in 500 BC near Nigeria. So over here, and they kind of spread out along the coast. And the Nok people introduced things like iron tools and terracotta sculpture that are really the other tribes take and really advance. We start to get more migration into the forests as a result of desertification and drought, and that the desert started to really advance up here. And so the people wanted to escape the desert, and they start to move into these areas instead. And so this results, as all these people start to move into this concentrated area, you get a concentration of cultures, a concentration of languages, economies, political systems, traditions in this tiny area. So you get a whole bunch of tiny kingdoms in a small area. Colonizing the forest is not going to be an easy thing, and so some tribes are going to do the hard work, and slowly over a long time they're able to chop down forests and set up agriculture and really expand so they can have more food, expand their tribes. In other cases, we're going to get some tribes that will continue as hunter-gatherers and not so much agriculture, and they'll remain pretty tiny all the way into the 1500s. Areas with less vegetation, like grasslands, it's going to be a lot easier for a tribe to rise up, to start to plant, create agriculture, to get more food, as a result, get more people, and really grow. And so these areas are going to start as small kingdoms and then attack each other to become larger kingdoms. Benin City is an example of the 1200s, Nigeria in the 1000s. So this area is going to be significant for their role in the Atlantic slave trade because you're getting so much competition between the tribes. This is going to result in a whole lot of slaves to sell. So let's take a look at one by one some of these major kingdoms along the Guinea coast. Senegambia. The people of Senegambia, they share a common history. They share a common river, the Gambia River, a common language, but politically not united. It's almost a series of city-states that don't really get along. It'd almost be like ancient Greece, where they similar culture, similar language, but they fight each other constantly. Some of these areas were exposed to Islam when they were ruled by the Ghanans or during the Mali Empire. A very strict hierarchy with royalty at the top, slaves at the bottom, so nothing new. And they had slaves. Most of these empires had slaves. It's part of the system. Most people, however, were not rulers. Most people were farmers of rice, millet, sorghum, plantains, beans, and bananas. So again, rice is going to be essential. It's also going to be very helpful. And so rice farmers are prized as slaves later on. They're going to add some meat to their diet with adding things like fish from the river, oysters, but as well as rabbits and even monkeys to get a meat source beyond things like rice. And so other little things up here. Alex Haley, the author of Roots, what you're watching, was able to trace his roots back to the city of Jufure, and I put a little heart there. And so he recently, there's a mosque named after him now, but this is where Kunta Kinte was traced all the way back to. They're also famous in this area for their stone circles protected by the United Nations. There are over 17,000 of these stone monuments, almost like a little miniature Stonehenges, all around Senegambia. And this is showing an advanced society that they're building monuments, and some of these are used for burials of their kings. The Akan States. So the Akan States are located southeast of Senegambia as we kind of continue our path along these 2,000 miles. They arrived in the 1500s as the gold trade started to allow local leaders to clear out the forests. So they had the money to pay people to chop down forests so they can really grow food to increase the size of their empire. And so whatever gold they had, they would trade that gold for slaves. The slaves would clear the land. Now they could get more food and really increase their size. No food, no size. They can't really expand their empire without food. Settlers would receive the open land in exchange for a portion of their produce and services, almost like serfs in Europe, in that the land is all controlled by the king. People are allowed to use the land as long as they give up some of those crops and serve the king on occasion when the king needs them. Europeans show up and they trade guns for gold. And now that they have guns, these kingdoms can start to fight each other and really start to enslave each other and really expand with these new weapons. The Ashanti people, right here, the Ashanti, and we have all these little kingdoms fighting against each other in the Akan State area. So the Ashanti people create an army to expand their kingdom to really dominate the central forest region, and this army is also used to capture slaves for trade with Europeans. So they're fighting each other constantly, and with guns in the mix, it's going to be a lot easier to fight each other. More about the Akan states. Some of the others, the Yoruba people, live to the east of the Akans in modern Benin in Nigeria. And they got in control of the region around the year 1000 by trading cola nuts. And yes, that's a real thing. That was part of the original recipe of Coca-Cola. I won't talk about the other part of the coca, but the cola part is it's a natural nut from Africa, as well as cloth from Western Sudan. And so there are also major things they have. The city of Ife is known for skilled artisans in bronze, brass, and so here's one of the examples that have stood the test of time over 1,000 years later. And so this has taken some serious effort, and it shows that they're a society advanced enough that they have the time to create art. It's not just about creating agriculture, and they built something big enough that they have space and time for art too. The Oyo people are going to use cavalry because they've traded and brought in horses, and with this cavalry they're going to impose political unity in the region and really take over, but also become involved in the slave trade because they can easily capture people with their horses. Also in the area is the Kingdom of Dahomey, established by the Fon people to the west of Oyo, and it becomes another center for the slave trade, ruled by an absolute monarch who's going to take thousands of wives from Fon families to assure the loyalty of potential rivals. And so it's another strategy of this king in that he would take a female member of the family, marry that woman, and this way you're less likely to attack that king because the king is now part of the family. As he's marrying anybody that he takes over, he's going to take one woman from that family. And so eventually he has thousands of wives from these families, and he's able to maintain control through these thousands of wives. Benin. Benin's unique in that they are not a Christian state. They're not a Muslim state. They're largely going to maintain their traditional religion. And they are going to be most definitely involved in the slave trade. In the late 1400s, the Europeans are going to allow, for the first time, they're allowed to come in, and they're allowed to trade for gold, pepper, ivory, and slaves. And the king uses his army to capture slaves from some of the other kingdoms, because we have all these kingdoms in one dense area, all fighting each other, all enslaving each other. And so he starts to really become reliant on the slave trade. That becomes a good moneymaker. It becomes a huge part of their economy. And so for their economy to keep running, they need to capture more people. They need a constant state of warfare, as this is how they make money, by taking over other kingdoms, enslaving, and selling to the Europeans. But this is not going to be very stable. In economic decline by the 1700s, Benin starts to get desperate. So to save their economy, they start to sell their own people. They start to sell off the poor and some of the lower serfs to the European slave traders. In the same area, the Igbo people, they don't really have a central government. It's kind of a collection of villages with no central government. And so they start to sell their field workers and artisans to nearby kingdoms. And then when the Europeans arrive, because the Europeans have a lot of great stuff they want to buy, they start to, again, sell their own people, and this trade really starts to expand. So here's some examples of art from Benin. A brass, and so brass was one of the things that they would trade for, and it's just a highly valued metal, and so in many cases they would, it's valued for its weight, but they could also use it to create some beautiful art pieces. And so this is one example, and also some beautiful masks and wooden pieces with some amazing texture. Both of these you can actually, I've seen these are in New York. And so that was the Gulf of Guinea. Moving further south into more central Africa is Congo and Angola. And so most slaves that come to the Americas are from the Gulf of Guinea, but we also get a huge chunk from the Congo, around the Congo River. And so it's very similar to Guinea Coast peoples when it comes to culture. We have divided labor by gender as far as women will do certain jobs, men will do other jobs. They're going to live in villages with extended families of cousins and uncles. Kings get semi-divine status, that they're godlike. And so some examples, the Kingdom of Congo starts in the 1300s because they have some pretty nice fertile valleys with a lot of fish from the river. And so these are great areas to really start to grow agriculture, to grow food, to increase the size of your city and eventually a kingdom. They get their money mostly by trading salt and iron for materials that are from further interior Africa. So they're trading within the heart of Africa for things that they have, salt and iron. And then the Portuguese arrive. And the Portuguese offer some great stuff from Europe, and so they want to get in on that trade. They're welcomed by the king, and so here's a little picture of them being welcomed by the king, King Nzinga Kanuwu. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. His son, King Nzinga Nememba, wants to take it a step further. He wants to really strengthen that tie with the Portuguese, and so he tries to convert the entire kingdom to Christianity and remodel the kingdom along European lines to become more like the Portuguese so the trade can increase with the Portuguese. And the people of Congo say, this is a terrible idea, we don't like this, they revolt against him, and we get these fights within the kingdom, and that's when the Portuguese show up and they just take over. And so as a result of becoming more Portuguese, they fall apart and the Portuguese just take over the empire anyways in 1568. And so that's kind of a closer look at some of the other areas of West Africa.